He adjusted his bespoke Tom Ford tie, checked his reflection in the tinted window of the Bentley, and smiled, utterly unaware that his life was roughly 2 hours away from total implosion. Atticus believed tonight was his coronation, the night he would cement his status as CEO, while parading his stunning young mistress under the guise of an executive assistant. He thought his wife was at home, knitting in the suburbs. But Atticus forgot one crucial detail: the champagne in his glass, the diamond chandeliers above his head, and the very ground he walked on were all paid for by the woman he had betrayed. Welcome to the Obsidian Gala. The air inside the penthouse suite of the Pierre Hotel smelled of sandalwood crisp linen and the metallic tang of unearned confidence. Atticus Price stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror, smoothing the lapels of a tuxedo that cost more than most people's cars. He was 42 handsome in a jagged, predatory way, with hair the color of oat straw and eyes that always seemed to be calculating the exit velocity of a conversation. Tonight was the night. The Obsidian Gala. It wasn't just a charity event. It was the Super Bowl of New York's fiscal elite. The guest list was a manifesto of power, the Getty's representatives from the Arno family, and the board of directors for Stratton Oakmont Heavy Industries. Atticus was the acting director of operations at Stratton, but the rumor on the street whispered over single malt scotch at the University Club was that the CEO, old man, Preston Gillenhall, was stepping down tonight, and Atticus was the heir apparent. He checked his Rolex Daytona. 6:45 p.m. He pulled his phone from his pocket. The screensaver was a stock photo of a sailboat, neutral safe. He dialed home. It rang 3 times before a soft, slightly breathless voice answered. "Hello, Atticus?" "Virginia, darling." Atticus said, his voice dropping into that practiced baritone of the weary provider. "I'm just leaving the office now. It's chaos. The auditors are still here, and Preston is demanding a full review of the Q3 projections before the morning." "Oh," Virginia's voice cracked slightly. I thought you said the audit was finished last week. You promised you'd be home for the pot roast. I made the one with the rosemary glaze you like." Atticus rolled his eyes, a gesture safely hidden by the phone. He looked at the reflection of the Manhattan skyline, glittering like a jewelry box waiting to be looted. "I know, Vic. I know. It breaks my heart. But if I don't secure this transition, everything we've worked for the Connecticut house, your mother's care facility bills, it's all at risk. You understand, don't you? I'm doing this for us." There was a pause on the other end, a silence that stretched just a second too long, heavy, with something Atticus didn't have the patience to decipher. "Of course, Atticus," Virginia said, her voice flatter now. "For us. Don't work too hard. I'll leave a plate in the fridge. You're a saint, Virginia. Don't wait up." He hung up and tossed the phone onto the velvet duvet. A saint. That was the word. Virginia was reliable, quiet, and tragically plain. She was the woman you married when you were 24 and needed a stable roommate to share a mortgage in Queens. She was not the woman you stood next to when you were about to conquer the world. He didn't need a saint tonight. He needed a siren. A knock at the suite door interrupted his thoughts. It wasn't room service. "Come in," Atticus called out, turning away from the window. The door opened, and Chloe strutted in. If Virginia was beige wool, Chloe was neon silk. 26 years old, a junior marketing associate at a rival firm, and possessing the kind of hungry beauty that consumed everything in its orbit. She was wearing a dress that shouldn't have been legal, a backless emerald green slip of fabric that looked like it had been poured over her skin. "Tell me I look expensive," Chloe said, striking a pose in the doorway, clutching a Judith Lieber crystal clutch shaped like a jaguar. Atticus grinned, the adrenaline hitting him like a drug. "You look like a hostile takeover, babe. Absolutely lethal." She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around his neck, smelling of tuberose and ambition. "Are you sure about this, Artie taking me? Won't people talk, I mean, your wife?" "Let them talk," Atticus scoffed, kissing her forehead. "Virginia is at home in Westchester, probably asleep by now. And as for the people in that room, they respect power, Chloe. Walking in with you tells them I take what I want. Besides, I'll introduce you as the new head of international PR. By the time they figure out you're not on the payroll, I'll be CEO, and it won't matter." He checked his watch again. "The limo is downstairs. It's showtime." Atticus grabbed his phone, silenced it, and slipped it into his jacket. He felt invincible. He had the job in the bag, the hottest girl in the city on his arm, and a wife who asked no questions. As they walked toward the elevator, Atticus failed to notice the notification that silently lit up his screen. It wasn't a text from Virginia. It was a Bank of America alert. Transfer complete $2,500,000 to the Obsidian Trust. Reference VVDH. He didn't see it. He was too busy looking at Chloe's reflection in the elevator doors. The venue was the Metropolitan Museum of Art, specifically the Temple of Dender Wing. The gala organizers, a shadowy group of socialites, known simply as the Committee, had rented out the entire northern side of the museum. A line of black SUVs and limousines snaked down Fifth Avenue, disgorging men in tuxedos and women dripping in diamonds that caught the flashbulbs of the paparazzi. The air was electric, buzzing with the specific frequency of extreme wealth. Atticus's Bentley pulled up to the curb. A valet in a white jacket opened the door. "Ready," Atticus whispered to Chloe. "Born ready," she smirked. They stepped out onto the red carpet. The flashbulbs popped blinding white bursts that disoriented the uninitiated, but Atticus bathed in them. He placed a possessive hand on Chloe's lower back, guiding her toward the massive stone entrance. "Atticus, Atticus, Price," a reporter from the New York Post shouted from behind the velvet rope. "Comment on the rumors about the Stratton CEO position?" Atticus paused, turning just enough to give his good side to the camera. He offered a cryptic, confident smile. "No comment tonight, gentlemen. We're here for the charity, for the children." He winked and kept moving. "Who are they?" Chloe whispered, gesturing with a subtle tilt of her head toward a couple standing near the entrance. The woman was wearing vintage Chanel. The man looked like he owned a small country. "That," Atticus murmured, leaning close to her ear, "is Preston Gyllenhaal, my boss, the current CEO." Preston was a man of 60, with silver hair and the posture of a retired general. He was speaking with a woman whose back was turned to Atticus, a tall figure in a structured midnight blue gown that swept the floor. Atticus straightened his spine. This was the moment. He needed to make an entrance. He steered Chloe directly toward Preston. "Preston!" Atticus boomed his voice, jovial, projecting confidence. "An incredible turnout, isn't it?" Preston Gyllenhaal turned. His eyes, usually warm and paternal toward his protégé, were freezing cold. He looked at Atticus, then his gaze slid down to Chloe's plunging neckline, then back up to Atticus's face. There was no smile. "Atticus," Preston said. It wasn't a greeting. It was an acknowledgement of presence, dry as dust. "You made it. Wouldn't miss it for the world." Atticus beamed, oblivious to the temperature drop. "I'd like you to meet Chloe Vane. She's consulting with us on the European expansion markets. Brilliant mind." Chloe extended a manicured hand. "A pleasure, Mr. Gyllenhaal. Atticus speaks so highly of your leadership." Preston didn't take the hand immediately. He looked at it as if it were a dead fish offered on a platter. After a painfully long 3 seconds, he gave it a brief, limp shake. "Miss Vane? I wasn't aware we had hired external consultants. I thought our internal budget was frozen." Atticus laughed, a nervous barking sound. "Oh, you know how it is, Preston. You have to spend money to make money. Innovation doesn't sleep." "Indeed," Preston said. He shifted slightly, blocking the woman in the blue dress from their view almost protectively. "Atticus, enjoy the evening. I believe your table is in the West Annex." Atticus blinked. "The West Annex, but the board table is center stage, table 1. Table 1 is reserved for the founding benefactors," Preston said, his voice clipped, "and their families. The seating chart was finalized this morning. Enjoy the buffet, Atticus." With that, Preston turned his back on them, resuming his conversation with the woman in blue. Atticus stood there stunned. The West Annex was practically in the kitchen. It was where they put the junior associates and the donors who only gave 5 figures. It was an insult, a slap in the face. "What was that about?" Chloe hissed, her smile tight and fake for the cameras nearby. "I thought you said you were the golden boy. He looked at me like I was the help." "He's just stressed," Atticus muttered, though a cold knot of dread was tightening in his stomach. "Old man is losing his grip. Probably jealous. Come on, let's get a drink. Once the presentation starts, he'll have to call me up to the stage. He can't announce the transition without me." They moved toward the bar, weaving through the crowd. Atticus recognized faces everywhere, titans of industry tech moguls from Silicon Valley, even a minor European royal. But as he moved through the room, he felt a strange ripple. People were looking at him. Not with the envy he expected, but with something else. Amusement, Uté. He grabbed a flute of Dom Perignon from a passing waiter and downed half of it in one gulp. "Atticus, look," Chloe said, nudging him. She was pointing toward a large digital display near the stage. It was scrolling through the names of the Diamond Tier sponsors, those who had donated over $2 million to the evening's cause, the Luminary Arts Initiative. Atticus glanced up, uninterested. "Tax write-offs, babe. Boring. No, look at the top name," she insisted. Atticus squinted. The screen refreshed, and the top name faded in with gold animated letters. Diamond Benefactor, the Van der Hoven estate. Atticus frowned. "Van der Hoven, I haven't heard that name in years. Old Dutch money. I thought that family died out in the 90s. "Well, whoever they are, they own this room," Chloe said, looking around at the lavish decorations, orchids imported from Singapore, silk tablecloths, ice sculptures. "This must have cost a fortune." Atticus shrugged. "Doesn't matter. What matters is the board meeting on Monday. Tonight is just a pageant." He turned to grab another drink, and that's when he ran into Lydia St. Clair. Lydia was Virginia's best friend, or she had been years ago, a sharp-tongued, terrifying woman who ran a gallery in Chelsea. Atticus hated her. She had always seen through him. "Well, well," Lydia poured, holding a martini glass like a weapon. She looked Atticus up and down, then shifted her gaze to Chloe. "Atticus. And accessory." "Watch it, Lydia," Atticus snapped. "This is Chloe, my colleague." "Colleague," Lydia repeated, testing the word like it was sour milk. "Is that what we're calling them now? Does Virginia know you brought your work home? Or rather, out to the museum?" "Virginia is at home," Atticus said, icily, "where she wants to be. Not that it's any of your business." Lydia smiled. It was a terrifying smile. It was the smile of a cat that had already eaten the canary and was now just playing with the feathers. "Oh, I think you're right, Atticus," Lydia said. "Virginia is exactly where she wants to be. Enjoy the West Annex. I hear the acoustics are terrible, but the view of the exit is spectacular." She tapped her glass against his and walked away, disappearing into the VIP section, the section roped off with heavy velvet cords, guarded by men with earpieces. The section Atticus was supposed to be in. "I hate that woman," Atticus muttered. "She knows," Chloe whispered, suddenly looking nervous. "Atticus, she knows." "She suspects," Atticus corrected. "She doesn't know anything. She's just trying to rattle me. It won't work." But his hand was shaking slightly as he reached for his third glass of champagne. Suddenly, the lights in the massive hall dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd of 5,000. A spotlight hit the main stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice boomed over the speakers, "please take your seats. The presentation is about to begin." Atticus grabbed Chloe's arm. "Come on, we need to find a way to table 1. I'm not sitting in the annex." "Atticus, we can't just—" "I'm the next CEO of Stratton Oakmont," he hissed. "I sit where I want." He dragged her toward the front, ignoring the ushers. He was determined to force his way to the main table to demand his seat next to Preston. As they neared the front, the spotlight shifted. It didn't land on Preston Gyllenhaal. It landed on the woman in the midnight blue dress, the one Preston had been talking to earlier. She was standing at the podium, her back to the audience, adjusting the microphone. "Who is that?" Chloe asked. The woman turned around. Atticus stopped dead in his tracks. The champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor, the sound echoing in the silence. It was Virginia. But it wasn't the Virginia he knew. The grey cardigans, the messy bun, the nervous smile gone. This woman was statuesque. Her hair was styled in sleek Hollywood waves. She wore diamonds around her neck that looked heavy enough to anchor a ship. Her makeup was flawless, sharp and fierce. She looked regal. She looked terrifying. And she was looking directly at him. "Good evening," Virginia said into the microphone, her voice steady, amplified, filling the massive chamber. "I am Virginia Vanderhoven. Welcome to my party." The sound of the shattering champagne flute was swallowed almost instantly by the cavernous acoustics of the Temple of Dendor, but for Atticus, it sounded like a gunshot. Champagne soaked into his Italian leather shoes, cold and sticky, but he couldn't feel his feet. He couldn't feel anything except a roaring static in his ears. Virginia Vanderhoven. The name bounced around his skull, colliding with 15 years of memories, rewriting them in real time. He remembered their first date at a diner in Queens. She had ordered a grilled cheese and paid with cash, counting out the singles carefully. He remembered her telling him about her parents. She had said they were gone, and that they had left her with a lot of baggage. Atticus had assumed baggage meant debt, or perhaps a history of alcoholism. He had never asked for clarification. Why would he? He was Atticus Price, the rising star. He liked being the savior. He liked that she needed him to fix the leaky faucet in their first apartment. He realized now with a nausea that nearly buckled his knees that the baggage was likely a diversified portfolio of industrial trusts, shipping lanes, and half the real estate in Lower Manhattan. "Atticus," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. She pulled her arm away from his, instinctually distancing herself from the blast radius. "Atticus, isn't that your wife? Why is she using a different name? Why is she up there?" I don't," Atticus stammered. His mouth was dry as sand. Around them, the whispers of the elite began to rise like steam. "Vanderhoven. I thought the line ended with old Cornelius." A woman in a red Valentino gown murmured to her husband just a few feet away. "No," the husband replied, adjusting his monocle An affectation, surely, but one that signaled old money. There was a daughter, ran away in her 20s, wanted to live a normal life. Disappeared off the grid. Rumor was she married a nobody. Some salaryman. Some salaryman. The words hit Atticus like a physical blow. He looked up at the stage. Virginia knew this woman stood comfortably in the spotlight. She didn't have the hunched shoulders she wore at the kitchen table. She stood with the posture of a woman who owned the ground beneath her feet. Preston Gyllenhaal, the man Atticus had spent 5 years sycophantically courting, stepped up to the edge of the stage, clapping enthusiastically. He looked up at Virginia, not with the condescension of a boss, but with the reverence of a subordinate. "Oh my God," Atticus breathed. "She owns Stratton." "What?" Chloe hissed. "Stratton Oakmont." Atticus said, his voice rising in hysteria. "The company. My company. The Vanderhoven Trust was the original angel investor in the 1940s. I saw it on the old letterheads in the archives, but I never made the connection." He turned to look at Chloe, desperate for an ally, but Chloe was looking at him with a dawning expression of horror and disgust. She wasn't disgusted by the deception. She was disgusted by his incompetence. In her eyes, Atticus had transformed from a powerful executive into a court jester who didn't know the Queen was sleeping in his bed. "You didn't know?" Chloe asked, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You've been married to one of the richest women in America for 15 years, and you didn't know." "She lied to me," Atticus snapped, though he kept his voice low. "She pretended to be poor. She clipped coupons for God's sake. She didn't lie." "Atticus," a smooth, venomous voice came from his left. It was Lydia St. Clair again. She had looped back from the VIP section, likely unable to resist the spectacle of Atticus's disintegration. She took a sip of her martini, her eyes dancing with malicious delight. "Virginia never said she was poor," Lydia said, leaning in close. "She said she lived simply. There's a difference. You just never bothered to ask the follow-up questions because you were too busy listening to the sound of your own voice." "Lydia." Atticus warned, "Tell me what is going on." "What's going on?" Lydia said, gesturing to the stage with her olive pick, "is that the board of directors was getting tired of the stagnant growth at Stratton. They wanted a shake-up. Virginia has been a silent partner for years, content to let the boys play with their toys. But when she found out her husband, the acting director of operations, was funneling company funds into business trips to Cabo with a 20-year-old marketing assistant." Lydia's eyes flicked to Chloe. She decided it was time to stop being silent. Atticus felt the blood drain from his face. "She knows about Cabo." "Atticus?" Lydia laughed softly. "She paid for the hotel. Who do you think owns the resort? It's a holding of the VDH Group. You put the room service on the corporate card. You literally billed your wife for the champagne you drank off your mistress's stomach." Chloe audibly gasped. She took a step back, her heel catching on the edge of the red carpet. "You billed—" "Oh my God, I need to leave." "Chloe, wait." Atticus grabbed her wrist. "Don't make a scene. Let go of me." Chloe yanked her arm, back her eyes wide. "You're done, Atticus. You're toast. I'm not going down with you." She turned and fled, pushing her way through the crowd of tuxedoed onlookers disappearing toward the exit. Atticus was left standing alone, surrounded by the scent of his spilled champagne and the heavy judgmental stares of New York's high society. On stage, Virginia tapped the microphone. The sound echoed like thunder. "Thank you all for coming," she said. Her voice was warm, yet it carried a steel edge that Atticus had never heard before. "Tonight is a celebration of clarity, of seeing things as they truly are." She looked out into the crowd. For a heartbeat, her eyes locked with Atticus's. There was no love in them. There was no anger either. There was only the clinical detachment of an auditor marking a file, void. The room went silent. 500 of the world's most influential people, billionaires, senators, celebrities, stopped breathing to listen to the woman in the midnight blue dress. Atticus stood frozen near the back by the pillar where his dignity had died moments ago. He wanted to run, but his legs refused to cooperate. It was a car crash, and he was strapped into the driver's seat. Many of you know the Van der Hoeven name. Virginia began her hands, resting lightly on the podium. My grandfather built an empire on steel and shipping. He believed in durability. He believed that if you build something strong, it withstands the storm. She paused, smiling a small, enigmatic smile. I walked away from this world 20 years ago, she continued. I wanted to understand what it meant to build something from nothing. I wanted to see if love and loyalty could exist without the scaffolding of wealth. I wanted to be chosen for me, not for the number on a balance sheet. A ripple of sympathetic murmurs went through the crowd. Atticus felt like vomiting. She was rewriting their history, turning their marriage into a social experiment. I found a simple life, Virginia said. I found a partner. Or so I thought. I invested in that partnership. I gave it my time, my patience, and my absolute trust. In finance, we call this sweat equity. You work hard hoping the investment matures. She clicked a remote in her hand. The massive screen behind her changed. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a photograph. It was a picture of Atticus and Virginia from 10 years ago, standing in front of their modest house in Westchester. They looked happy. Atticus looked younger, softer. Virginia looked adoring, but Virginia said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming darker. Any good investor knows the sunk cost fallacy. We hold on to bad assets because we are afraid to admit we made a mistake. We keep pouring resources into a failing venture because we remember the promise of the IPO. The screen changed again. This time it was a graph, a jagged red line plunging downward. It was labeled Stratton Oakmont, Operational Efficiency, last 4 quarters. Recently, Virginia said, I decided to audit my portfolio, both personal and professional. What I found was disappointing. She gestured to the graph. Stratton Oakmont has been managed with a lack of vision. Resources have been misappropriated. Expenses have been inflated. She didn't look at Atticus, but everyone else did. The crowd was smart. They connected the dots. The acting director of operations was the one responsible for that graph. I discovered that the leadership was distracted, Virginia said coolly, focusing on external pursuits rather than the core stability of the firm. Laughter rippled through the room, nervous, knowing laughter. So, Virginia announced, her voice strengthening, booming through the hall. I decided it was time to return. The silent partner is speaking up. She took a deep breath. Tonight I am announcing 2 major restructuring moves. First, the Van der Hoeven estate is exercising its majority option to buy out the remaining public shares of Stratton Oakmont. We are taking the company private effective immediately. Gasps. This was huge business news, billions of dollars moving in a second. And second, Virginia continued, we are restructuring the executive board. We need leadership that values integrity, leadership that understands that you don't spend what you don't have and you don't betray the people who sign your checks. She clicked the remote one last time. The screen displayed a massive headshot of a man Atticus recognized immediately. It was David Chen, a quiet, hard-working VP of logistics whom Atticus had bullied for years. Please welcome the new CEO of Stratton Oakmont, Virginia said, gesturing to the wings of the stage. Mr. David Chen. Applause erupted. It was thunderous. David Chen walked onto the stage looking shocked but dignified. He shook Virginia's hand. Preston Gyllenhaal clapped him on the back. Atticus stood in the shadows, stripped of everything. In 3 minutes, she had taken his job, his reputation, and his future. She hadn't just fired him, she had replaced him with the guy Atticus used to make fetch his coffee. But she wasn't done. One last thing, Virginia said, raising a hand to quiet the applause. The room fell silent again. This gala is a fundraiser for the Luminary Arts Initiative, which supports underprivileged youth, she said. In the spirit of charity, and in the spirit of cleaning house. She looked directly at Atticus. This time there was no mistaking it. She pointed a finger right at the West Annex, right at him. I am personally donating the entirety of my soon-to-be ex-husband's golden parachute severance package, roughly $4 million to the fund. Since he breached the morality clause in his contract, the money is technically forfeit, but I think it serves a better purpose here than it would in a sports car dealership. The crowd went wild. They cheered. They laughed. It was a blood sport, and Atticus was the gladiator being fed to the lions. Enjoy the evening, Virginia said, her voice icy finality. And try the crab cakes. I paid for them. She turned and walked off the stage, leaving Atticus Price standing in a pool of spilled champagne, while the wealthiest people in New York applauded his destruction. He felt a hand on his shoulder, heavy, firm. He turned to see 2 large men in dark suits. They wore earpieces. They didn't look like waiters. Mr. Price, the larger one said. Yes, Atticus whispered. Mrs. Vanderhoven has requested that you be escorted from the premises. Also, we need to retrieve your company phone and access badge. They are property of Stratton Oakmont. Now, Atticus asked, his voice cracking. Now, the guard said. And sir, she also cancelled the car service. You'll have to take an Uber. Atticus looked at the exit. The long walk of shame. The cameras were waiting outside. The paparazzi would have the story by now. He had walked in a king. He was walking out a pauper. Don't touch me, Atticus snapped, trying to summon a shred of his old arrogance. I can walk. Then walk, the guard said, crossing his arms. Atticus straightened his tie, which felt like a noose, and began the longest walk of his life, the applause for his wife ringing in his ears like a funeral dirge. The heavy oak doors of the museum closed behind Atticus with a definitive thud, sealing the warmth and the music inside. Outside, the New York night was biting cold. Atticus stood on the steps, shivering in his tuxedo. He reached for his phone to call the driver, then remembered the security guard's words. She cancelled the car service. A wall of flashbulbs went off. The paparazzi, sensing blood in the water, swarmed him. Mr. Price, is it true you were fired for embezzlement? Atticus, who was the woman in the green dress. Did you know your wife was a Vanderhoven? Look this way. Atticus, he shielded his eyes, pushing through the throng of photographers. No comment. Get out of my face. He stumbled toward the curb, waving frantically for a taxi. The line of black SUVs, waiting for the other guests, ignored him. He was a pariah now. Finally, a battered yellow cab screeched to a halt. Where to? The driver grunted, not looking back. The Pierre Hotel, Atticus said, sinking into the cracked vinyl seat. And hurry. He needed to regroup. He needed to get to the suite, grab his passport, maybe clear out the safe. He had about $10,000 in cash stashed in his briefcase emergency money. If he could just get to that, he could figure out the next move. The ride was agonizingly slow. Atticus checked his phone. No messages from Virginia. No messages from Chloe. Just a stream of Google alerts pinging rapidly. Alert Stratton Oakmont, stock. Halted pending governance review. Alert Who is Virginia? Vander Hoven, the secret heiress of New York. Alert Viral video. CEO fire husband live on stage. He felt sick. The cab pulled up to the pier. Atticus reached for his wallet to pay. He pulled out his black Amex, the heavy titanium card that he loved to slap on restaurant tables. "Machine's broken," the driver said. "Cash only." I don't have cash on me," Atticus stammered. "Run the card. It works." The driver sighed and swiped it on a handheld device. Beep. Declined. "Try it again," Atticus demanded, sweat beading on his forehead. "That has a $500,000 limit." Beep. Declined. "Pick up card." "Buddy," the driver said, turning around. "The machine says pick up the card. It's been reported stolen." "It's not stolen. It's my wife's. It's a joint account." "Look, get out. Just get out before I call the cops." Atticus scrambled out of the cab, the driver cursing at him as he sped off without payment. Atticus straightened his jacket and marched into the lobby of the pier. He would deal with the bank later. Right now, he just needed to get into the elevator. He walked straight to the lifts, bypassing the front desk. He pressed the button. Nothing. He swiped his keycard. A red light blinked. Access denied. "Mr. Price." Atticus froze. He turned to see the night manager, a man named Mr. Henderson, who had greeted him by name every day for the last week. Henderson didn't look friendly tonight. He looked pained. "Mr. Henderson," Atticus said, trying to project authority. "My key isn't working. I need a reset." "I'm afraid that won't be possible, sir," Henderson said, clasping his hands behind his back. The reservation for the royal suite was terminated approximately 45 minutes ago by the billing party. "Terminated?" Atticus laughed incredulously. "My stuff is up there. My laptop. My suits." Henderson gestured to a luggage cart sitting discreetly in the corner near the bell desk. "We took the liberty of packing your personal effects, sir. Mrs. Vander Hoven gave very specific instructions. We were to ensure nothing was left behind." Atticus stared at the cart. His Armani suits were stuffed haphazardly into his Toomey bags. His toiletries were in a clear plastic bag sitting on top. It looked like the luggage of a refugee, not an executive. "This is ridiculous," Atticus spat. "I want to book another room, a standard room. Just for tonight." "We are fully booked, sir." "The hotel is empty. Everyone is at the gala." "We are fully booked to you, Mr. Price," Henderson said softly. "The Vander Hoven Trust owns the land this hotel sits on, Atticus. We have a strict policy regarding guests who are in legal conflict with ownership." Atticus felt the floor tilt. She owned the hotel ground lease. How much did she own? "Where am I supposed to go?" Atticus whispered. "I believe there is a Motel 6 near JFK Airport." Henderson suggested his face, impassive. "Would you like me to call you a standard taxi?" Atticus grabbed the handle of the luggage cart. He didn't say a word. He pushed it out the revolving doors back into the cold onto Fifth Avenue. He sat on his suitcase on the sidewalk, the wind whipping his face. He pulled out his phone again. He dialed Chloe. It rang once. Then, "The subscriber you have dialed is not accepting calls at this time." He checked Instagram. He searched for it Chloe_Vane_marketing. User not found. She had blocked him. He was sitting on a curb in a $5,000 tuxedo with nowhere to go, no money, and no friends. 3 days later, the fluorescent lights of the Queen's Motor Inn buzzed like an angry insect. Atticus sat on the edge of a mattress that sagged in the middle, staring at the stained carpet. He had sold his Rolex Daytona to a pawn shop on 8th Avenue for $4,000 a fraction of its value just to get some cash. That money was bleeding fast. He had spent the last 48 hours making calls. First he tried Cravath Swain and Moore. He managed to get a junior associate on the line. "I want to sue for wrongful termination and marital assets," Atticus had said, his voice hoarse. "There was no prenup. I'm entitled to half of Stratton, half of the trust." "One moment, Mr. Price," the associate said. A minute of hold music. Then the associate returned, voice chilly. "Sir, we cannot represent you. We are retained by the Van der Hoven estate for corporate governance." "Fine," Atticus snapped. He called Scadden Arps. "Conflict of interest, sir." He called Kirkland and Ellis. "We represent the bank that handles the trust." He called a high-profile divorce shark he had seen on TV. "Atticus, listen to me," the lawyer said candidly. "I'd love the publicity, but you have no case. I looked into the filings. Everything Virginia has, the trust, the company shares, the real estate, is separate property, inherited before the marriage. It was never commingled. You lived in a house she bought with a separate account. You drove cars leased by her trust. You have zero claim to the principal. And regarding the termination, you signed an employment contract with a morality and reputational harm clause. You took a mistress to a company event while embezzling travel funds. They have the receipts, Atticus. Literally. They have the receipt for the room service." "So I get nothing," Atticus screamed into the phone. 15 years. "You got a free ride for 15 years, the lawyer said. "My advice, leave New York. Start over in, I don't know, Ohio." Atticus hung up. He threw the phone against the wall. It cracked but didn't break. He needed a drink. He walked to the mini-fridge and grabbed a lukewarm beer. He turned on the TV. It was Entertainment Tonight. And in viral news, the host chirped, "The mystery woman from the Red Wedding Gala speaks out." Atticus froze. On the screen, sitting in a soft-focus interview setup, was Chloe. She was wearing a modest white sweater, looking tearful and innocent. She wore no makeup. "I didn't know," Chloe sobbed on camera. "He told me they were separated. He told me she was abusive. I was just an employee. I was young and I was manipulated by a man in power." The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Chloe Vane, victim of power imbalance." "He told me he was the CEO." Chloe continued, wiping a tear. "I feel so terrible for Virginia. She's such a strong woman. I actually sent her a letter of apology, and she was gracious enough to reply." Atticus's jaw dropped. Chloe was pivoting. She was turning this into a #MeToo moment. She was erasing her own complicity and painting Atticus as the predator. "And now?" the interviewer asked. "Now I just want to move on," Chloe said, brightening up slightly. "I've actually been offered a position as a brand ambassador for a new clean beauty line, funded by the Luminary Arts Initiative." Atticus threw the beer bottle at the TV. It shattered the screen. She had switched sides. Virginia had bought her off. Or more likely, Virginia had offered her a dignified exit in exchange for burying Atticus. It was brilliant. It was ruthless. Atticus sat in the silence of the broken room. He realized then that he had never been the main character. He thought he was the Wolf of Wall Street. In reality, he was just the dog that Virginia had kept in the yard fed and housed until he bit the hand that fed him. And now he was being put down. His phone buzzed. A text message. It wasn't from a lawyer. It wasn't from Chloe. It was from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Price. This is Joseph from the Van der Hoven legal team. Attached is a settlement offer. It is a one-time offer. You have 24 hours to sign. If you contest, we will release the full internal audit of your spending to the district attorney. We believe grand larceny carries a sentence of 5 to 15 years. Atticus opened the attachment with trembling fingers. The settlement 1. Atticus Price agrees to an uncontested divorce. 2. Atticus Price waives all claims to spousal support. 3. Atticus Price signs a non-disclosure agreement regarding the internal operations of Stratton Oakmont. 4. In exchange, the Vanderhoven estate will not press criminal charges for the misappropriation of $245,000 in company funds. 5. Atticus Price will receive a lump sum payment of $50,000 to assist with relocation. $50,000. That was less than the cost of the earrings Virginia had worn on stage. It was an insult. It was mercy. Atticus looked around the motel room. He looked at the broken TV. He thought about prison. He hit reply. I'll sign. 1 year later, the sky over Dayton, Ohio, was the color of a bruised plum, a heavy, relentless gray that seemed to press down on the rooftops. It was raining again, a cold, needle-sharp drizzle that didn't sparkle like the summer storms in the Hamptons. It just soaked into the asphalt, turning the world into a blur of wet concrete and exhaust fumes. Inside O'Malley's Auto Parts, the fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing flicker that Atticus had almost stopped noticing. The air here didn't smell of sandalwood or crisp linen anymore. It smelled of vulcanized rubber stale coffee and the metallic tang of motor oil. "Hey, buddy, I don't have all day," a voice snapped, cutting through the hum. Atticus blinked, pulling himself back from the window. Standing at the counter was a man in a grease-stained windbreaker, tapping a credit card impatiently against the Formica. "I asked if you have the carburetor for a '98 Chevy," the man grunted. "Or are you getting paid to stare at the rain?" Atticus Price, once the acting director of operations for a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, a man who had commanded rooms of Harvard MBAs, with a raised eyebrow straightened his spine. He adjusted the collar of his blue polo shirt. It was a size too large, bunching unflatteringly at the shoulders, and the embroidered name tag on his chest read "Artie" in cheerful red stitching. "I apologize," Atticus said, his voice practiced and level. "I'll check the inventory in the back for you." "Yeah, you do that," the customer sneered, checking a bulky wristwatch that probably cost less than the socks Atticus used to wear. Atticus walked into the back storage room, the heavy steel door swinging shut behind him. The silence here was a relief. He moved down the aisles of boxed parts, his fingers trailing over the cardboard. His hands, once manicured weekly at a salon on Madison Avenue, were now dry and calloused. There was a permanent smudge of graphite under his left thumbnail that he couldn't scrub away. He found the part, a heavy, dusty block of metal, and paused for a moment, resting his forehead against the cool shelving unit. It had been a long year. The $50,000 from the settlement had evaporated with terrifying speed. Between the punitive taxes, the relocation costs to a state where his reputation hadn't yet poisoned the water, and the security deposit on a drafty one-bedroom apartment above a bakery, the money was gone in 6 months. He had tried to apply for consulting gigs remotely. He had sent out resumes to boutique firms in Chicago, Boston, even second-tier cities like St. Louis. But the internet never forgot. A simple Google search of Atticus Price brought up the videos, the memes, the headlines, the Gala grifter, the husband who fired himself. He was radioactive. The corporate world, which prided itself on risk management, viewed him as the ultimate liability. So he had fallen, until he landed here, ringing up spark plugs for minimum wage plus commission. Atticus dusted off the carburetor with a rag, took a deep breath, and walked back to the front. "Here you go," Atticus said, punching the code into the ancient register. "That'll be $145.50. The customer shoved the card into the reader, grunting a non-committal thanks before grabbing the bag and walking out. He didn't look Atticus in the eye. To him, Atticus was just a fixture of the store, as relevant as the rack of air fresheners by the door. Atticus leaned back against the counter, listening to the rain drum against the glass. The store was empty now. The lunch rush was over. He reached under the counter past the stacks of invoices and the half-empty bottle of Windex and pulled out a magazine. It was a copy of Forbes. He had bought it 3 days ago at the Kroger down the street, hiding it between a loaf of bread and a carton of milk, so the cashier wouldn't ask why a guy in a stained polo was buying financial literature. He hadn't been able to open it until now. It sat on the counter, the glossy cover reflecting the overhead lights. He knew what was inside. He had heard the whispers on the news in the break room. He knew that Stratton Oakmont had not only survived his exit, it had thrived. The stock price had tripled since the company went private. The Clean Tech initiative, led by David Chen, the man Atticus had once mocked for bringing Tupperware lunches, was now the industry standard. And he knew about Chloe. That was a specific kind of sting. Chloe Vane had not been exiled to Ohio. She had pivoted. She had wept on camera, written a memoir titled Surviving the Shark Tank, and rebranded herself as a wellness advocate for survivors of toxic power dynamics. She was currently dating a linebacker for the New York Giants and had just launched a line of organic skincare. She had monetized her mistake. Atticus had been the villain in her story, and villains sold books. But it wasn't Chloe he was looking for. Atticus's hand trembled slightly as he flipped the pages. Page 40. The new titans of industry, visionaries of the decade. And there she was, the breath hitched in Atticus's throat. It was Virginia. But it wasn't the Virginia he remembered, the woman in the grey cardigan who clipped coupons and worried about the heating bill. It wasn't even the vengeful queen in the midnight blue dress from the Gala. This was a titan. In the photograph, Virginia was standing on the balcony of a glass skyscraper in Singapore, the futuristic skyline gleaming violet and gold behind her. She was wearing a structured white power suit that looked sharp enough to cut glass. Her hair was cut into a chic, asymmetrical bob. Her posture was relaxed yet commanding. She looked radiant. She looked unburdened. Atticus read the text, his finger tracing the lines, leaving a faint smudge on the glossy paper. Under the stewardship of Ms. van der Hoeven, the conglomerate has shifted its focus to sustainable infrastructure, posting record profits for the 4th consecutive quarter. When asked about her sudden re-emergence into the public eye after decades of privacy, Ms. van der Hoeven cites a personal awakening. Atticus skipped down the page, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was looking for his name. He needed to know he still existed in her world, even as a scar. He found it in the final paragraph, a footnote. Ms. van der Hoeven was previously married. She credits the dissolution of that relationship as the necessary catalyst for the company's restructuring. Sometimes she is quoted as saying, "You spend years trying to prop up a structure that is fundamentally unsound. You realized that to let the forest grow, you have to clear out the dead wood." Dead wood. Atticus stared at the words until they blurred. She didn't hate him. Hate implied passion. Hate implied that he still held power over her emotions. Dead wood was something you didn't hate. It was just something you removed because it was blocking the sun. It was an obstacle to growth. He realized then, with a clarity, that was more painful than the humiliation at the museum that he had never been the protagonist of this story. He had spent 15 years thinking he was the Wolf of Wall Street, the provider, the genius. In reality, he was the anchor dragging her down. He was the chaotic variable she had managed with patience until the math no longer made sense. She hadn't just survived him. She had ascended because she got rid of him. He closed the magazine slowly. He felt a stinging heat behind his eyes, but he refused to let the tears fall. There was no one here to pity him. There was no audience. The bell above the door jingled aggressively, shattering the moment. A blast of cold, damp air swept into the shop. "Hey, Artie!" the manager called out from the back office, his voice muffled by a mouthful of sandwich. "You mind taking this one? I got to hop on a supplier call." Atticus looked at the closed magazine one last time. He slid it off the counter and dropped it into the recycling bin beneath the register. It landed with a soft thud among the cardboard scraps and soda cans. He took a breath, pushed his shoulders back, and adjusted the name tag that read, "Artie." "Sure thing, boss," Atticus called back. He turned to the door where a young couple was shaking out a wet umbrella, looking around the shop with confusion. Atticus put on his smile, not the arrogant smirk of the executive, but the humble, genuine smile of a man who knows exactly how much a dollar is worth, because he has to stand on his feet for 8 hours to earn it. "Welcome to O'Malley's," Atticus said. "How can I help you folks today?" The King of Glass Castles was gone. There was only Artie, the guy who sold car parts. And as he rang up a quart of oil, Atticus realized that for the first time in his life, he was living an honest day. And that is the story of the Obsidian Gala, a brutal reminder that in the game of life, you should never mistake silence for weakness. Atticus thought he was playing chess, but he didn't realize he was just a pawn on Virginia's board the entire time. It's a lesson in hubris, loyalty, and the terrifying power of a woman who knows her worth. What do you think? Did Atticus deserve his fate, or was the punishment too harsh? And would you have forgiven him if you were Virginia? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'd love to hear your take. If you enjoyed this story of high-stakes revenge and karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. We have a crazy tale coming up next week about a lottery winner who hid his ticket in a place nobody would look. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.